Hi everybody, and welcome to my first of two videos on this, the Minolta XK, also called the XM or X1 in different markets. This is a camera I am really excited to be doing a video for. It is a professional grade interchangeable lens 35mm SLR, and what that means is that the lens on front can be taken off and have more different lenses put on. But it means so much more than just that it's an interchangeable lens camera. It's a professional grade interchangeable camera with different backs and different prisms that you can put on it and a whole series of other accessories. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means as we go through these two videos. This camera has different meters depending on the type of prism that you have, some of which don't even have a meter in them. The viewfinder magnification depends on the prism that you have, and I couldn't find the magnification percentage for any of the viewfinder prisms anywhere in the manuals or online that I looked. The viewfinder frame coverage for this standard prism is 98%, but again, that varies by prism. It has an interchangeable focusing screen, and there were 11 different options you could use. And then it has a flash sync speed of 1/100th of a second, and that flash sync speed is marked by this X. So you can use the flash anywhere from this X up to 1/60th of a second, and the X is the fastest shutter speed you can use it at. This camera's target market were professional users. It was Minolta's first of really arguably two forays into the full high-end professional grade 35mm market. The other one being the Alpha 9, which came much later. There are some people who would argue the X700 was a professional camera. I would not exactly take that position, but the X700 was their best X series body. The XK was too expensive for most amateur photographers. It hit the market with a sale price of an MSRP price, that is, of $790 US. In 2016 dollars, that's about $4,500. So if you can imagine, that's as much as a professional grade DSLR today, which is appropriate for a professional grade camera, but most people cannot afford a professional grade DSLR. Most people could not afford this camera either, and because of that, it wasn't a commercial success, and there wasn't a huge quantity produced of these. It was made by Minolta Camera Company in Japan from 1973 until 1981, so it had a good production run of 9 years. This camera was preceded by nothing. Minolta created the professional SR system with the XK, building upon the SR system. So the SR system included cameras like the SRT series and the SR before that. The XK built upon that framework to create a professional grade body, but there was no professional grade camera before this. It was produced concurrently with a whole bunch of cameras like the SRM and the SRTs 100, 101, 102, CMC 200, 202, 202, I have that listed twice. SC2 and MC2, just a whole bunch of different SRT bodies, not all of those at once, but that's indicative of this camera having a 9-year production run and the number of changes that Minolta made to the SR system in that time frame. It was followed by the X700. However, the XK was the only truly professional grade system camera Minolta made for the MD mount, or MC mount in this case, because it predated the MD version. So if you have your Minolta XK, X1, or XM, they're all the same thing. Let's take a look at it. We're going to take a look at all the buttons and dials, of which there are so many on this camera. We'll talk about what each of them do. And we're going to start actually on the front, even though we're on the top here, with the strap lugs, and this is where you would connect your camera strap. Over here on this side, we have the battery check button, which if you turn the dial down, you can see it's lighting up, and that indicates that I have good batteries in the camera. That light does not necessarily indicate that my camera will work. This is a really crotchety camera, this specific copy of it, so we're going to hope that it's feeling cooperative today and that it will actually work. No promises. Here we have the film rewind knob and lever. So the lever pops out of the knob, and this is what you use to rewind film. We have these, you can see the silver ring around it has these two cutout areas right here and here. Those are your accessory shoe grooves. So there's a little accessory thing you can put on top of this that sticks in place, so you can put additional accessories like a flash up here, which is good because it mounts the flash slightly off-center of the lens, which is the best place to have it. Off-center, the further the better. Here we have this little red line going through a 0. This is your film plane indicator that tells you where the film is in the camera. So if you want to take detailed measurements for macro photography, for instance, or other images where you don't have the benefit of being able to look through the viewfinder, that's what you would measure off of. This little silver guy right here, next to the film plane indicator, is your accessory release lock, and what you do is you push it down, and you might be able to see there's a little pin right there in front of my finger. When you push it down, it goes into the camera's body, and that is what you push to be able to remove your accessory shoe things from on top of here. On this prism, which is one of the standard prisms, it's one of the later versions, I believe, of the standard prism, we'll take a look at what's on here. This is your ISO indicator, this red dot. So whatever you set your ISO to, it says ASA. ASA and ISO are the same thing, but right now I'm set to 400. So I can just rotate the dial to change my ISO. This is really good for exposure compensation. The other way you can exposure compensate is by lifting this ring, and this is your exposure compensation indicator. And so we'll talk a little bit more about how this stuff works in the second video. This is your shutter speed dial. Now this is one of those things that varies by prism. So this prism has the auto exposure shutter dial, as well as all these manual speeds from 1/2000th down to a full second. And bulb and X. Bulb is where you push the shutter button down. It stays open as long as you hold it down, and then it closes when you release the button. And then of course X, as we saw, is your flash sync. So this little guy right here is your long shutter speed setting dial. And you can see on the back there are a set of numbers, bulb, 16, 8, 4, and 2. Those are full second indicators, 2, 4, 8, and 16 seconds. To set your camera to one of those settings, you push in this silver guy right here, and then you rotate until the little red line there is at the setting that you want. Your camera has to be in bulb in order for that to work, and then you can set it for up to 16 seconds. This is your film advance. This is your shutter release. When you change your shutter speed setting, this guy has to be at bulb down here as well on the camera back. Here's your serial number, and here's your frame count window that indicates what frame your camera is at, your film rather. Let's take the prism off really quickly and I'll show you what's underneath it. Gotta take the lens off for that, I think. So underneath the prism, we have on the side here some ribbon contacts, and these are how the camera's prism gets power from the battery and also communicates with the shutter when you use the different shutter speeds that are controlled by the prism. On the prism itself, we have the serial number here, the ribbon contacts again. This red thing right here is your meter interface that connects to your lens so that your camera knows what your aperture is set to. And this little pin right there connects to the front of your prism, front of your camera. That's what locks the pin in place. When you push this button here, which we'll see in a second, that allows you to remove the prism. And then your focusing screen, which is interchangeable, and we'll see how that works in the second video. So let's take a look at a couple of the other things on the prism while we're here. On the back of the prism here, we have the on-off switch, and this allows the camera to be turned on and off, specifically the light meter, so that you do or don't waste your battery. This is your viewfinder shutter blind closing dial. Ooh, that is so cool. I gotta say, this is really about the coolest shutter blind closing I've ever seen. And you just rotate it to open and close your shutter blind. I mean, I suppose you could do all of your shooting with it partly closed if you wanted to just frame everything that way, but it doesn't change what's recorded on the film, only what you see. So it's kind of a waste to do that. So it clicks into place when it's open, and you can see that the little white index dot here is right above the arrow when it's open, right above that other index dot at the end of the arrow when it's closed. On the top front of the prism right here, we have a window, and this allows light to go into the prism, bounces it off of a mirror in here, that then bounces it onto another mirror, which illuminates the light meter, part of the viewfinder, which we'll see in the next video, so that in the dark you can still read the light meter as long as there's light hitting this window. If you wear a baseball cap when you shoot photos, as I do, it really makes it hard to view the viewfinder in this camera. The other thing is that these mirrors have a tendency to fall off or become tarnished with time. So if you want to fix this, this is pretty easy to take apart. I'm not going to show you how to do it. That's a little bit out of my league, but I have done it. I've taken this apart. The repair videos are out of my league, that is. I've taken it apart and as a temporary fix covered it with shiny side-out aluminum foil, which does a surprisingly good job of directing the light from here to the viewfinder. Kind of janky, but it works. So here's the front of the camera, and let's take a look at what all is on the front of the camera. Let's get the lens out of the way so you can see it unimpeded. There's a lot here. Here we have the census switch, and the census switch is designed so that when you hold the camera like this, you're pushing this button down, and the camera needs that button to be on to work. This is something that Minolta retained in their later autofocus cameras, although not as a switch. You'll notice on a lot of the autofocus cameras that there are two silver bars, and those are an electrical contact so that when your fingers grip the two silver bars on the grip, it creates a contact which then turns the camera on. This is the earliest version of that, a physical switch. At one point, Minolta was removing these and turning them permanently to on for photographers, but that modification wasn't made in this camera. This is the self-timer right here. To operate the self-timer, you wind it down that way, and then you hit this button. It takes the picture, finishes winding, finishes resetting the shutter, and then you advance the frame when you get back to your camera. This is the depth of field preview button. I'll show you how that works with your lens really quickly. So if you set your lens to an aperture like f/16 and then hit the depth of field preview, one of the nice things is you don't have to hold it down. All you have to do is push the button and it pops out. You can also rotate it, and let's see what that does. You can see on your depth of field preview button there's a red dot on the button part that pops out and a red indicator here. So if you rotate those, you've now gone into mirror lockup mode. This is a pretty genius way of doing mirror lockup because the mirror's locked up, so the shutter is the only movement you're going to have. There's no mirror slap. Beyond that, your lens is already stopped down, so there's no motion from the lens being stopped down when you take the picture. This is the most stable, shake-free, mechanical camera mirror lockup interface that I've ever seen in a camera. It's really cleverly thought out and well designed to minimize camera shake. I'm going to show you one other thing about this which is really genius. To undo this whole thing, mirror lockup and depth of field preview, you just push the button back in and it all resets. That's pretty fantastic. This red dot right here is your lens mounting index. We'll see how to use that in the second video. This is, if your prism rather has a meter on it, this is the meter interface that connects with your lens, this sliding silver dude right here. Over on this side we have the lens release, and of every camera that uses the SR mount, this one has, I think, the best lens release button. It doesn't have that silly little thing that the SRT series have. It has a nice, legitimate button with a good feel. It feels stable. It doesn't feel like it's going to break. It's really very well designed. It's nice little touches like that are great. Here's your flash PC port. This is what you would connect your flash PC cable to. This X and FP is your flash type. X stands for xenon. It's your modern standard flash. If you went into any camera or electronics store and bought a flash off the shelf, that is an X flash. FP flashes use disposable bulbs. They aren't made anymore. You're probably not ever going to use an FP flash, so you'd want to keep it in X. FPs had advantages because you could sync them at a faster shutter speed than an X flash can be synced at. So when we say the flash sync is 1/100th, that's talking about with an X flash. So any flash you would buy today syncs at 1/100th on this camera. Okay, so here we are on the camera's back, and there's a few things here to look at. This little silver button right here is the prism release. So when I took the prism off, the silver button is what I was pushing. This is a conversion chart from ASA, which is the same as ISO, to DIN, which is the older German system. A lot of times when you buy better types of film, it'll say 200, and then next to it it'll say 24 degrees, or it'll say 121 degrees. So a lot of the films still have the DIN information printed on them. I wish this one did, it didn't. But if you are using a film which only has DIN, you can you can see what the DIN is in ISO terms. In general, most films you're going to buy today do not list only the DIN on them. They list the ISO because that's the international standard now. Now, one other thing also, this conversion chart right here only appeared on the older bodies of the X1MK cameras. So this is an older one, or it at least has a film back from an older one. But I'm telling you, this is a pretty old camera. But if your camera does not have one of these charts on it, it's not missing anything. It just means it's one of the newer cameras. By new, I mean like late 70s, early 80s. Guess that's new. To me, it's new. So let's take a look at the camera's bottom. One thing, if you buy a camera, they used to say, always put your social security number and your name on it so that the police can return it to you if it's stolen. I mean, even in the day that was boneheaded advice, but now in the day of identity theft, which honestly no one could have predicted back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's terrible, terrible advice. Do not put your name and social security number, at least, especially not your social security number, on a camera. Just don't. And if you find one that does, and you do YouTube videos, really cover it with tape. So at any rate, the social security number that's engraved in this under the tape is not supposed to be there. But what we have is we have the Made in Japan, the film release button right here, which we'll see how that works in the second video. The tripod bushing right here for connecting it to a tripod. Open and close, this is your battery chamber. The red dot indicates whether it's closed or open, and we'll see how this works in the second video. And this is a film memo indicator. This has no control over how your camera operates. This is just to remind you, if you have black and white, daylight, tungsten, or negative type film in there, and whether you're using 12, 20, or 36 exposure rolls. That's it. That's its one job. And it does it brilliantly if you use it, which I don't. So here we are inside of the camera. This is the film cassette chamber. This is where the film will go when we go to take pictures, and I'll show you how that works in the second video. These four silver rails are your film guide rails, and what they do is the outermost rails prevent the film from sliding up and down as it moves through the camera, and the inner two rails work with the film pressure plate, which we'll see in just a second, to keep the film flat on plane as it slides through the camera. This is your shutter curtain. This is what opens and closes when you take a picture. This is your film tension sprocket, and what this does is it keeps the film from being pulled back across the film plane as you advance it. It also helps keep it taut so that it's flat as it's pulled through the camera. This is your film take-up spool, and this is what you attach your film to load it, and we'll see that in the second video. And this is what the film is taken up onto as it advances through the camera. And again, in the second video, we'll see how this whole process works, and I'll show you what's going on inside your camera when you take pictures. This is the camera's back. And it's pretty simple. We have the film pressure plate right here, and over here we have the cassette positioning bit. This keeps the film cassette in proper alignment in the cassette area. While the film's running through the camera, the film pressure plate keeps it flat in conjunction with these longer guide rails. So some notes and special features about this camera. One of them, the first one, is that those shutter curtains are made of titanium, and that gave this camera what was, at the time, a super fast top speed of 1/2000th of a second. Today that seems silly low, but when this was released, 1/2000th of a second was staggering. It was the only complete system Minolta professional grade camera. Now, what the Minolta did make the Alpha 9 many years after this, which is a professional grade camera, but it doesn't have some things like a removable prism, which this does. Now, the Alpha 9's prism is good enough, no one in their right mind would want to remove it, but this had some features that the Alpha 9 does not, and this was the most complete professional system camera that Minolta ever made. It competed directly with the original Canon F-1 and the Nikon F2, but it was more akin in design and features to the Canon F1 New. This was released before the Canon F1 New. The Nikon F3 it had a lot of feature similarity with, and even to an extent, the Pentax LX in terms of capabilities. Now, one thing about those three cameras that it really competed with, they all came out after it. This predated the flagship, generally most sought after manual focus professional grade cameras of the other three makers. This was the trendsetter, and this was, in a lot of ways, the inspiration for some of those cameras' features. All of those cameras that I mentioned as ones that are comparable in features to this camera came out at least 10 years after this hit the market. This was also the first 35mm SLR with automatic exposure based on TTL metering. There were other cameras with a TTL meter, but there were no other cameras that had a TTL meter, meaning through the lens meter, the light coming into the lens gave you your meter reading, that also automatically determined exposure based on it. All you had to do was set the aperture and let the camera determine the shutter speed. So one of the things Minolta did, it benefited this camera as well as all of theirs, and really shows their commitment to quality. And Minolta's commitment to quality across their product line, across the decades, is staggering to me. They did a marvelous, marvelous job. They adjusted every single X series lens. Now you can see this says MC Rocore PF. If it said Rocore X, the X lenses were a higher grade of lens than the ones with other letters on them. So they adjusted every single X series lens manually to obtain precise focus from the lens and the way that the lens elements were structured on the film plane. Now, even though every single 50mm Rocore X F1.4 was the exact same formula, there are production variances in the way that the machines spit them out, whether or not somebody had eaten lunch recently and was a bit burpy while they were operating the machine. I mean, little tiny minute differences. So after the X lenses were made, they'd go back and manually adjust them further. Now this effectively eliminated lens image quality variation due to those production variances, which meant if you had a 50mm f1.4 Rocore X and you scratched it or dropped it, you could grab another one and know that it was going to perform just as well as the one you'd had on your camera previously. That wasn't true for other makers. And in other makers' lenses, there could be a wide array of performance quality for the same lens. Production variances can really have a huge effect on image quality. So by eliminating that, they gave their professional users consistent image results across the board with every X lens. Really amazing, amazing dedication to quality. A couple things not to do with this camera. Don't touch the shutter curtains. Don't open them and stick your finger in and let them close. Those are great ways to ruin your camera. Don't touch the mirror that's inside the shutter box. It's surface-coated glass, meaning the silver is on the surface. So if you touch it, you will risk tarnishing it with your finger oils. Don't leave your camera or lenses in your car because of heat damage. The oils in your camera will get thin in the heat, get to places they shouldn't be, get back to normal temperature and get back to their normal consistency, and then things won't work properly, especially in your lens where they can get on the aperture or the elements. Also, don't leave them out in your car in the cold because the oils will get thick and gummy and break down, and then your camera won't work properly. It's also a great way to have your car broken into if you just leave a camera in it. So I really don't recommend that at all. Don't store your camera in a plastic bag or box because moisture will get into it and it will cause fungus to grow on the lens elements or in the leather. And I'll tell you, fungus and mildew in lens leather, and camera leather rather, is disgusting and an awful thing to put your nose next to. Don't let your camera get wet. They're not weather sealed cameras. Water can get into them and can short out the electronics and brick an otherwise perfectly good camera. And just remember, your camera is a precision tool and should be handled with care and respect. As long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. This is my first of 2 videos on the Minolta XK or 1 or M, all perfectly great names for this camera. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track and that I'm producing content which is useful to you. If you have any questions, please leave those below. I'm pretty good about responding fairly quickly. If you have thoughts or comments or suggestions for future videos, please let me know. A lot of the format and structure of these videos and the things we talk about have evolved from viewer comments, which I appreciate and that help make these videos better. If you'd like to subscribe, please click the subscribe link. And one last thing, thank you guys for watching.